nature doesn't need us to save it or conserve it. Nature will continue to exist without humans. Regeneration is about creating positive impact.
Spirituality and how it sort of overlaps into this concept of regeneration.
You look at pottery and you look at the mycelium network underground, it is all interconnected.
But isn't all of this just indigenous knowledge?
And that is something that we've lost.
Let me introduce you to my dear friend and an absolute force in regenerative fashion, Eshwari Thopte. From her early days in sustainable fashion and fashion tech incubation in London to her deep academic research on human nature relationships in Dutch business models to now teaching at the Amsterdam Fashion Institute, she has built a career that seamlessly blends eco-psychology, philosophy, and regenerative leadership. Her work goes beyond sustainability. It's about redefining the entire system, weaving in ancestral wisdom, culture, and a radically different way of thinking about fashion's future. And today, with her, we get the opportunity to dig deeper into all of it and then some more. Eshwari, welcome to Ethically Yours, finally.
Finally is the right word. I don't know. I think it's been a few years that we're planning to do this.
Yes, but you're always traveling to exotic places, either in the Himalayas or in some Swiss Alps or in the Wanty Park in Amsterdam. So it's very difficult to catch hold of you. So I'm going to blame this on you. But thank you so much. We're finally doing this, and there is so much to talk about. To begin with, I just thought it will be interesting to sort of go on a little flashback. And if you can just give me or us an overview of what your journey has been. You know, we studied together, we undergraduated in design, then we did a master's. But from there, I think your career has just taken a very different and unconventional path, which has been extremely amazing. I have always been inspired and proud of you, and I continue to be, genuinely, you know that. So just give a snapshot of what that entire journey has been.
I mean, firstly, I think it's a privilege to share this and do this together and be the first video podcast of Ethically Yours.
That's true.
So I think all the traveling and the not being able to pin me down or, you know, find like a mutual date or place to do this was a sign that this needed to be happen, you know, had to happen this way. And also, I think, yeah, like you said, like we've had so many, you've been one of my constants, you know, from undergrads, 4 years together to like actually doing our masters together. So that entire journey, I mean, that's kind of like half a life, right?
Yeah,
that we spent together.
indeed.
And also the whole experience of going abroad for the first time together. I think both of us had never been to London before we moved there. So that, you know, anticipation, excitement, and then sharing our first house together, like that's a lot of
Together.
ground. Yeah, together, right? Like, I think like, yeah, that's basically like a marriage. and which has lasted much
20
longer
years.
than most marriages. So that's, you know.
That's a good one.
And I think, yeah, like you said, the admiration is mutual. We've also had a very unconventional career as well, right? Like after you come back here, you've had your, you know, entrepreneurial stints, which is something that I know you get from your mother. And it's so great to see women, you know, leading and doing stuff on their own, you know, agenda, like not following, but being leaders. So I think, yeah, the admiration is definitely mutual. For me, it was none of this was ever planned, right? I knew one thing, that when we went to London, I mean, when I did my graduation from NIFT, I think I had the best time of my life in NIFT.
You did.
You did too. Don't say it as if you didn't. So there was a lot of, you know, fun times. And I think I graduated knowing and having the clarity that there are much better designers than I am. Because I had we were in different classes, but you know that I had incredible people in my class. So when I saw the graduation projects and when I saw mine, I was like, okay, yeah, this is not my scene. And I'm glad that I had that clarity back then, because that helped me pursue the business side of fashion. And the little stint that I did for 6 months in India before I went abroad also helped me figure out what I wanted, what I didn't want to do. In fact, I was off for a whole year. I think we had a year before we went, right? Between finishing undergrad and doing our masters. And eventually, doing the masters in London was quite a pivotal moment for me. It was the first time I was, you know, so far away with you and with some of our friends, but there was so much responsibility and this pressure that, because we've taken student loans and gone, I was
Tell
like,
me about it.
yeah, like I was like, I have to prove it to my family that boss, I can do this. Okay. Like I had a very clear agenda that I'm going to go, I'm going to stay there, I'm going to work my ass off, get a distinction and find a job, like stay at least 2 to 3 years before going to New York. That was the initial plan. Until I did go to New York with work, and then I realized this is not where I want to be. So without much planning, I think I ended up staying in London. And the biggest reason for that was the amazing job that I had at Center for Fashion Enterprise.
But before we get that, I really have to give you full marks for the fact, like whatever you just said, that you went there with a plan and you knew that you are here to work hard. And she's taken up all possible opportunities that a student could have, whether it was retail jobs, whether it was writing jobs. She was writing for a publication called Eco Fashion World, when I had no idea about what sustainable fashion was. We were going to Primark and shop because, of course, students, and we wanted everything for cheap. But really kudos to you, because that conviction, or just the fact that you were open to try out all possible verticals of the fashion industry to really find out what works. The entire trial and error method, which I don't think a lot of people do. When you graduate out of, let's say, NIFT, the straightforward answer is, you have your own label or you're a stylist. But I think your journey specifically is unique because of that.
Yeah, and I also, to be honest, I really don't know where and how I decided to do that. If I decided to do it, there was a plan in the sense that I had an overarching idea that, okay, this is what I want to do. But I had no clarity on how I was going to do it, So I don't know if it was a senior that said, do whatever you can, or I don't know if it was just that, I had things come to me that I decided to give it a chance. But speaking of Eco Fashion World, that's a special thing because I started writing for Eco Fashion World in 2009 itself, right? Like the year we went to London. And because of them, I got access to London Fashion Week to cover Aesthetica, which was the first sustainable fashion initiative. And that's how I started creating a really strong network. So I was there at the right time. I was being seen by the right people. I was interviewing the right designers and brands, and actually wrote my dissertation on sustainable fashion. So my dissertation, master's dissertation, which I got a distinction for, was based on exploring strategic fashion alliances in the UK sustainable fashion industry. And the person who was pivotal in helping me, find the topic and write my dissertation, which eventually she and I published as a research paper, which was my first research paper, was Kim Poldner, who is the reason I am currently in Netherlands. So I just have to give a shout out to you, Kim, because she's been like the biggest mentor, cheerleader, support system since the beginning. And I never expected life to, put us together in the way that we have in the last 2 years that I've been working with her in Netherlands.
Talk to me about the importance of a mentor. We do not, especially in India, we do not have the ecosystem of a mentor, mentee, coach, professionals who've been there in the industry, who have the right network, don't lend themselves out to newcomers or emerging talent. Why is it important? How has that changed your trajectory?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think luckily I've always had incredible mentors. I think it's really important to either seek one, like for example, if you are in a particular sector, or if you want to learn about something new, of course, the first thing we do is try to read about it, try to get do some course about it online or whatever. But the lived example and the application of it is what a mentor can help you with, right? Like theoretical, like it's figuring out how to translate that theoretical knowledge into practice. And I think that is what Kim was for me, because at that time, we were young, we were new, we were still learning, and sustainability was like very, very in its infancy, like it was just starting. So if it wasn't for Kim and her, support and her excitement and her passion for this, and she'd been doing this for a long time, since 2003-4, I think, I would not have taken it up, and her persistent interest in my work and my dissertation. She was a very unofficial external mentor on my project, right? Like we had official supervisors, who's Anna Watson, who's also a wonderful, wonderful person. We had like a couple of other amazing teachers. I remember, Rachel, I think,
yeah,
who was your course
Yeah.
manager. And I think having like these allies and people that you can look up to, but also, like you said, people who give up their time to support the next generation without having undue expectations is really important. And I don't think it does exist in India, maybe in a different form, and maybe, the dynamics might be a bit different. One reason could be the lack of time, because of course there's a much better work-life balance outside India, which is, I'm sure, surely going to get here as well, and it should get here because otherwise we're headed in the wrong direction. But it is important because, if you don't take the time to share your experiences, your mistakes more than your, successes and wins, but it's what you've learned from your failures, and what, how do you reflect on the things that worked but also especially didn't work. I really worked hard to network, to find people. Like, I don't know if you remember, but I used to do a lot of meetups. Like, I just discovered meetup.com. And me and you and maybe Anna and a couple of my friends would often just go to random meetups around fashion, sustainability, and entrepreneurship, or technology, and all of, so it's actively seeking and expanding and growing your network, which really paid off for me in the long run. So I think that is the key, to really put yourself out there, to try and find and, seek conversations and connections. And then maybe, and hopefully that eventually turns into a mentor. But unless and until it's kind of like, you can think about it as speed dating, right? Like if you don't go out there and put yourself out there and have a few conversations and kiss a few frogs, you're not gonna,
you're not finding your prince charming.
So it's similar,
Yeah.
So you have to put yourself out there. You have to make the initial efforts. You're not going to just sit at home and expect random mentors to knock at your door. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Got it. That's a good one. No, that's a note for me, because I really, I'm not good at networking, and that's something that I've always tried to be inspired. But I don't know, it's just very difficult for me for some reason. I'm maybe like I'm a closed door social butterfly, maybe, but not so.
It's interesting you say that, because like for me, the way I see you, you're a great networker. Like, you are a social butterfly. So maybe
Within
for
that
you,
network.
maybe for you, you think, or your image for yourself is that you're a closed network social butterfly. I mean, we all have our own images in our own heads, right? But I do feel that oftentimes people accept who they are and then just don't make an effort to
No, that's wrong.
change or update or work. It's like, okay, everybody has to have radical acceptance. But then what is beyond that? Like, if you accept who you are, and if you're very happy with your life, great. Then you're mostly going to stay where you are, right? Like, but if you really want to change, or if you're not happy with certain aspects of your life, it doesn't have to be everything. But like, for example, over the years, like, I was not very comfortable with public speaking, even though I have been performing dance since I was a kid. I mean, you know this very well. And I think you have a much better TV screen, stage performance than I do. I mean, we've performed together so many times. But I was, I think, nervous. So even though I can perform with my body, so dance is like expressing through your body and movement. And because I know I was good and I've trained in it for such a long time, I was confident in that. But when it came to public speaking, which I needed to do a lot for my job in London, I was not very comfortable initially. And then I had a choice whether I had to work on it, push myself and put myself out there and really, make an effort to get better at it, or just accept the fact that I'm not good at it, And I refuse to accept the fact that I'm not good, because it's a skill. You can work on certain things and you can get better at certain things if you see them as skills. And if after all that effort, you still feel uncomfortable and you still don't feel good, then of course, then it's stupid to keep pushing and then, feeling miserable about it. But if you make an effort and if you push, oftentimes you find that it's just a voice in your head.
I really want to talk about regenerative fashion. But before we get there, help differentiate sustainable fashion, circular fashion, regenerative fashion. Like, that was not enough. We were just adding new and new terminologies and concepts. So let's look at all three of them and what it means.
Yeah. And that's a very valid and important and good question. It's often the introduction to all my proposals that I've been writing. So I have this by heart because I had to answer this question like a million times, also in my own head. So sustainability, the definition of sustainability is aiming to do less harm so that, the future, we do not impact the lifestyle of future generations, right? So the key is doing less harm. Okay. Now the problem is, we've already done so much harm as an industry. So whether it's fashion or whatever, shipping, mining, let's not go there. But any industry that has contributed to pollution and biodiversity loss has, pushed certain boundaries beyond its limits already. So there's already irreversible damage. So if at this point you're still aiming to reduce harm, it really doesn't make a huge difference in the long term, right? So at this point, what we really need to do is start working towards reversing that harm. And that's where regeneration comes into pictures. Because with circular is also, I think the original rationale for circularity and circular economy or circular fashion was to, reduce harm or eliminate waste, right? Like the idea is to eliminate waste and to create circular loops of resource efficient, raw materials and waste. So using waste as raw materials. But the problem is with the circular economy, theoretically and in practice, is a lot of the focus is on resource efficiency. The focus is on reducing waste or eliminating waste as opposed to creating positive impact. So there again, the limitations of the circular economy or circular fashion has been too much focus on material efficiency as opposed to a holistic ecosystemic perspective. And regeneration is all about understanding the interconnected nature of everything that is connected into the fashion industry, right? So it's not just about fashion supply chains, because circular economy or circular fashion focuses entirely on the supply chain. Regenerative fashion, so regeneration by definition is about creating positive impact. So not only reducing harm, but aiming to create positive impact. So it's like proactive, not reactive. And it takes a systemic perspective. So when we say systems thinking or systemic perspective, what I mean by that is that different ecosystems have, micro ecosystems, right? Like the overarching ecosystem is, let's say, the economy. Now, there in a fashion economy or in a fashion industry, you have agriculture, which is connected to raw materials. You have manufacturing, which is connected to making stuff. You have processing plants, which is connected to converting like fibers to fabrics or whatever. You have weaving, you have production. Like there's so many different things. But outside the supply chain, so you have your agriculture, you have your recycling plants, you have your customers, you have their lifestyles, you have their statuses, you have their purchasing powers. There's so much that is connected to this. And then beyond that, if you think about it, it all exists within the natural ecosystem, right? Like all of this is taking place within our natural ecosystem. So if you don't consider the impact these microsystems are having on the bigger system, that's what's been backfiring for a long time. I recently read somewhere that burnout in our bodies is basically climate change experienced in our bodies. And that hit me because it's so true. People think that climate change or polluted waters or AQI or air pollution is external, but it's not. It is affecting you on an internal level because we live in a world where all of this is a reality. So if you don't understand how deeply interconnected everything is, we are always going to be trying to solve problems in silos without considering the impact that solution has on a different ecosystem. And that's the problem, like the big problem we see now with the scientific revolution or science and technology or over pursuance of science and technology, is that science works in a way that you have a big issue, you break it down into small problems, and then you solve those small problems, right? That's how science works. You don't try to tackle the entire issue, together, because it's just difficult. But then the problem is if you keep solving things in silos and you don't then zoom out and look at the big picture, then you have, without realizing, created other problems. So that is why regeneration is about understanding the systemic perspective. It is about holistic kind of action. So what it means in fashion is, for example, a sustainable brand. So I've been working with an amazing Dutch sustainable brand, Jolene Joling. She's been a sustainable fashion designer for 17, 18 years, okay, which is a long time. And she is now sold one of her retail. So she had two retail outlets in Netherlands, one in Rotterdam, one in Utrecht. And she sold one of her retail outlets in order to buy a farm in the east of the country, which is a radical move, right? The other brand that I know that did this before was Elvis and Cressy, which is a British luxury handbag brand. And they did the same. They did a crowdfunding event where they moved their headquarters, which was initially in an old mill, to a farm, and they became regenerative farmers. Now, there's no reason for fashion brands or luxury brands to become farmers. But the reason or the rationale to do that is because they've been in the industry for so long that they've realized that their efforts were not meeting the goals that they were trying to set themselves. And one of the reasons was that they were so disconnected from the land or the soil or this entire like natural ecosystem that they felt like, okay, unless and until we understand how, our actions impact this, we cannot preach something we don't truly understand, right? So that's how it started. And now, since they've been on the land, they've experienced such radical shifts in their own nature and their own being, in the way they connect or in the way they relate to natural systems and themselves. So it's also your inner and outer nature, right? So like there are 4 areas of separation. There's the inner outer nature, there's human nature distinction, there's left brain, right brain, there's masculine, feminine. And this is all stuff that is there in a beautiful book, by the way, called Regenerative Leadership by Giles Hutchins and Laura Storm, which is kind of the base of my research. And I feel like until and unless you take these kind of radical steps, and which are very difficult for corporates to do, which is why SMEs always lead these kind of innovations, it's important to do this authentically, right? So when you're living the walk, like when you're doing what you're saying and you're leading by action, it's more likely that people will understand and embody that, right? I mean, that's what Gandhi said, like, be the change. So I think that's what makes me feel inspired to do what I do, is trying to be part of that change, because you can only learn by doing and not just talking.
I love that you have mentioned interconnectedness a couple of times in this conversation. And I want to have the conversation where we could potentially draw a parallel between spirituality and regenerative as a concept. Of course, it applies to fashion. It has to technically apply to other industries as well, or even scientific, like every action has an equal and opposite reaction, is essentially what this means. So, and you have gone through quite a spiritual journey yourself. Life has thrown so much at you. We're not going to get there today, but just your experiences of spirituality and how it sort of overlaps into this concept of regeneration.
So regeneration, the core principle is, of course, to aim for positive impact and positive change and proactively working towards positive change. But the core idea is to realign with nature. When we say nature, whether it's nature, it's prakriti, whatever, I consider nature as the entire ecosystem, including humans, right? I mean, that's how nature has been defined for the longest time. Unfortunately, during the scientific revolution, when humans started exploring or understanding nature or nature's principles, so we started, that's Descartes in the Enlightenment during the medieval ages, the church was sponsoring a lot of these philosophers and innovators and scientists or thought leaders to conduct experiments to understand the forces or laws of nature, right? And because it was done in such an extractive way, and because by this we had, already had the agricultural revolution, we created new religions, and there was a lot of prosperity and a lot of life expectancy had increased and stuff. So humans started seeing themselves as separate from nature and superior to other beings. So a lot of that is hand in hand, like the growth of Christianity, which is a monotheistic religion, an Abrahamic religion, and the separation of Father God to Mother Nature. So like the focus being more on the masculine, sky god rather than the feminine earth goddess, right? So it started from there. And then, of course, with the Industrial Revolution, that accentuated extractive behavior and focus on productivity and extracting raw materials from earth, extracting manual labor from humans. So over time, on one hand, we were starting to see a much better lifestyle for us. But on the other hand, we were also not realizing what this extracting behavior was doing to us and to the environment, right? And the reason spirituality and regeneration is entangled and intertwined or interconnected is because everything in nature is interconnected. And science also says that, like when you talk about physics, biology, chemistry. So in biology, when you look at botany and you look at the mycelium network, which is the fungi, the fungal network underground, it is all interconnected. That's how forests and plants in forests speak to each other and communicate to each other through these fungal networks. And which is why a lot of our ancestors across different parts of the world have been using these mushrooms as plant medicine and psychedelics to connect and tap into, this unseen, untangible network that we have. This, whether it's network, whether it's I don't know, what do you call it, like cosmic entanglement.
Access.
Yeah, access.
Maybe unveiling a new layer of.
Yeah, like, so I don't know if you've seen Avatar, this movie. It's a beautiful movie and a great example of how in most civilizations and cultures around the world, so the Nakwi people, they believe in this mother tree of Eva and they believe in the spirit of Eva. And they tap into it with their tails and when they connect. That is what, that is what in a lot of ancient civilizations, including ours, did for a very long time when they worship nature, when they worship this. Even in Hinduism and Vedic texts, what we call Brahma is the ultimate reality or the ultimate connection, the interconnected of all things is Brahma. And then, of course, our body is like, the physical reality that we experience. But we are all interconnected on a spiritual reality. So you, me, everyone, like all of us are interconnected on a level. It's just because we cannot comprehend that connection and we cannot physically experience that connection in a normal day-to-day life. We don't, understand the importance of it. And which is why, on one hand, when you, cut forests, you, pollute waters, you carry on your production without unchecked, without checking the impact, it does impact you, or it impacts all of us on an internal level. But because right now the system has brought us out of poverty, it has got us out of, plagues and diseases, and, capitalism has really helped us survive beyond the world wars and beyond a lot of, global calamities. It has worked to a certain extent, but now we're starting to over-rely on one system, and which is why we're seeing so much imbalance in other parts of our lives, right? So unchecked growth is never good. Like anything in extreme is never good, whether it's Amrit or whether it's, whatever, like whether it's food, whether it's dance, whether it's movement, whatever. If it's unchecked and if it's extreme, it's never going to be good because everything in life has to be in balance. So, and that's the core principle in most spiritual ideas or thoughts, whether it's Taoism, in this yin and yang and, black and white, good or evil. Like both need to exist, but in balance. And I think that's what regeneration is about. So because there has been so much overproduction, so much extraction, and so much pollution, if we don't, at least half of us or most of us try to reverse that, we're going to meet our end much sooner. And this is all about us, by the way. Like nature doesn't need us to save it or conserve it. Nature will continue to exist without humans. It's more about us understanding that we are part of this. And if we really want to survive longer and not meet an end that the dinosaurs did, we really need to start now.
Yeah. I think this entire narrative of saving nature because nature wants it is sort of skewed because we just don't experience the impacts of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I love that you mentioned too much growth is not good, because I recently read this book called Less is More, and it really talks about degrowth.
Yeah.
And the author's really been able to give very data research backed scenarios where it says that the race for GDP is essentially not solving any problems. The happiness quotient or the well-being of your population is the marker, and the GDP is not. And there are so many even developed European countries who have now moved to 3 days working or 4 days working, and they are seeing an incremental change in the well-being of a human being, and that allows you the time and bandwidth to even think about nature or soil or trees, because right now we are just running on a treadmill and we are literally just behind completing tasks.
So speaking about this race of GDP, it's a very capitalist concept, right? But if you think about capitalism and the way it works, a capitalist economy only works when the population is depressed, sick, and upset or unhappy.
Yeah.
Because if we are not unhappy, we would not find instant gratification through Netflix and Instagram or buying endless stuff online. If we were healthy, we would not go to hospitals, we would not buy medicines, we would not eat junk food. And if we had good interpersonal relationships and if we spend time in nature, we would not want to live in a massive house or like upgrade our houses or cars or, So capitalism works on a very negative impact with people. So like the impact of capitalism, if you think about it, is extremely degenerative for humans and human interactions and relationships and their health.
Sadist. It's a sadist system. Can we,
I guess,
almost say that?
Yeah. So I mean, it's become that now. Of course, it was not the intention of capitalism, but now because we're over relying on it and because that's become the measure of success, this is our reality. And most people don't even realize this, right? Like most people, most countries, most governments either don't realize it or they are still chasing it in spite of it because that is the status quo. It has to be an equitable distribution across society, environment equally, right? And when I say environment, it's not just nature and plants, it's also animals, it's other beings, everything, soil, water, everything. So I think that is one key aspect so one of the projects that I'm currently working on or will be working on is exploring an alternative or a multiple value network or a multiple value chain where we actively focus on creating positive social and ecological value by involving local communities, customers of this fashion brand that I told you about, to help connect them to the soil, help connect them to the process of making clothing so that they understand the kind of time, labor, everything that goes into making a product, and then make an informed decision on, okay, how much of this do I really need in my life, right? And the second one is creating a fully biodegradable or compostable collection, because that's what our ancestor wore, like khadi, like all the natural, fibers, whether it's silk, whether it's linen, whether it's cotton, whether it's wool. That's mostly what our ancestors and, our people wore. And they were fully biodegradable because there was no chemicals, there was all natural dyes, the fast foods were all natural. So you simply, put it in soil and it degrades. We also don't need to, and we shouldn't over romanticize our ancestors and their lifestyles because the world has changed and our lifestyles have changed. So you can't always, do what they did because we don't live in the same world. But having said that, it's always nice to, when you take 10 steps forward, it's nice to, zoom out and see where we are coming from. And you might notice that, okay, maybe, in following that goal, I have deviated. So maybe I take a few steps back and then, retrace a few steps and then find a better path. I think that is what is essential. It's not just about going back to what and how we did things. It's about really recalibrating and questioning, okay, this was our starting point. This is where we are at. This is where we want to go. Are we really headed in that direction? Or, what have we lost in the middle? Or how is this path, how is it panning out for everyone, not just us, right? So it's also considering, and here is where the interconnected comes into picture. Like if clearly this is not positive for everyone, right? It's positive for, let's say, the 1% of the world. So it's things like that governments and international organizations also have to realize and take a call on and collectively discuss and agree on how to move forward.
The concept of sustainability or circularity or regeneration, a lot of the time India is looking at the West. But isn't all of this just indigenous knowledge? And I know that a lot of people speak about it in like the most simplified manner, but I want to dig deeper with you. Like the most commonly used example right now is a t-shirt in an Indian household ending up as a pocha. And that's like really on a superficial level. But how deep does this go? There is Ayurveda, there is soil, there is certain rituals that also align our harvest festivals. There is Pongal, there is Lodi, and all of this, and it's just all on a Western calendar, but it has a science to it. There was a balance to it, and now people are like, oh, but Lodi hai aur itni garmi hai aur Lodi hai aur kyun hai? But I don't think that we're really getting down to the reality that we have the answers with us, but we're just constantly aping the West. So can you, talk a little about indigenous knowledge, about what we have and why we are not using it?
Yeah. Sustainability as an inherent part of Indian life or our ancient indigenous cultures. And it's not just Indian, it's all over the world. Any indigenous culture has always been hyper sustainable and regenerative in nature because they consider themselves part of nature. So our ancient education system, the ashram system, schools were a part of nature. Kids went and lived in ashrams in nature, learned about nature. It was not just about bookish knowledge. It was about practical knowledge, understanding medicinal properties of plants and how to utilize them. So there was a lot of practical knowledge of how to use, and not just use, but to live in harmony with nature. Whether it's farming, whether it's forestry, not just extractive farming, but like replenishing forestry or planting a forest that is not going to be home just for you, but for birds, for insects, for other beings, right? And that is something that we've lost.
We have a couple of these alternate schools in Bombay who actually do not have your typical air-conditioned classroom. I mean, we didn't have it ever, but now it's Sydney because it's so hot. But they actually teach, and it's funny that I call it alternative, but they do a lot of these, creating that relationship and connectivity with nature in a lot of ways that you mentioned right now. But there are these conversations when I speak to parents who do opt to put their kids in these schools. They're like, it's a risk we are taking.
Absolutely.
Because we don't know what their future would be, because they do not conform to the typical standards and degrees of education. And sometimes you feel that my neighbor's kid is better at math now, though they're the same age. But then they're also seeing the soft qualities or skills that are essentially required for the leaders of tomorrow.
Correct.
I think we are also sort of missing that gap to say that the skill sets that are required to essentially lead in the future are not what we were taught. And there are so many things that AI is doing today. So a lot of our skills are going to be absolutely automated, obsolete, whatever that is. Your focus on leadership and regenerative leadership, I'm sure there are a lot of these ethos, theory, concepts that are required to be introduced, ingrained, a lot of unlearning, new learning for the leaders who want to sort of take this path, lead by example. But it is an extremely difficult task, right? I mean, I've been a part of a corporate trying to do this. And no matter how hard you try, it's really difficult to get all stakeholders to agree on something. You have to constantly keep proving that, okay, this is going to work. Yeah. The fact that it is going to have a financial benefit, it's always attached to growth still. And you have to keep creating those examples. So all of this sounds great when you speak about communities and smaller businesses. And you have spent some time in actually understanding what regenerative leadership is, and also grooming leaders now. Tell me what it is and how is it looking? Is there a ray of hope at the end of the tunnel, or is it a doomsday story?
What we really need in terms of skills in today's leaders is the balance of the masculine and feminine. And that is what I see through regenerative leadership. So, like I said, the 4 key concepts of regenerative leadership, or like to begin with, the 4 areas of separation that we first need to address are human nature disconnect, inner outer disconnect, masculine feminine disconnect, and the left brain right brain disconnect. So when you start reconnecting or addressing these 4 key areas of separation, and again, I'm quoting this from Regenerative Leadership, the book by Giles and Laura, you then come to a point where you create a balance within yourself, and you have a more balanced understanding of yourself and your ecosystem, or the ecosystem within you operate. And from that place, you're then able to understand or bring in the 7 logic of life, is what they call. I don't remember all of them exactly, but basically the key principle of the logic of life, or the wisdom of nature, whatever you want to call it, is that everything in nature creates conditions conducive to life, which means that anything that you see in nature is designed in a way, or is carried out in a way that it creates more life. It is not degenerative to life. So that's the number 1 principle. Then you have principles like everything in nature is seasonal. So, we have different seasons. Everything is cyclical. So there's different cycles and rhythms. There's a rhythm to natural life, whether you call it seasons, different seasons, whether it's the different ways or times certain fruits and vegetables come, whether it's the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly. Everything has a seasonal cyclical pattern to it, right? Nothing blooms all year round. Nothing stays the same. Everything is constantly changing. But there's a rhythm to it. The other thing is everything in nature is diverse, but also inclusive. So the most abundant spots on Earth are the forests of Amazon, or, different parts of the world, but like the Amazon is known as the lungs of Earth, is because it's a very biodiverse forest. There's no one type of tree. There are like so many species of trees, of shrubs, of plants, of animals, reptiles, insects, everything. And it's all inclusive, right? Like they all cohabit naturally. So that is also something that we have to consider when you and how you apply that in an organization is you create a culture where you invite diversity. So you ensure that there's diverse perspectives, backgrounds, education, skills, so that you have an entire army or an entire possibility of skills and people that can do a single task, but better. Because if you have the same kind of people with the same kind of knowledge and the same kind of background and exposure, you're going to have the same kind of output. You're not going to be able to be agile. And agility is really important in business. Similarly, if you are not inclusive to diverse opinions, to diverse backgrounds, to diverse aptitudes, Giles and Laura really beautifully have created this regenerative leadership DNA, which are basically like it's divided across regenerative design, regenerative culture, and regenerative being. So it's about designing your products, creating a company culture, and you as a leader. And there are different aspects of how you can apply this logic of life practically into how you run your business, how you become a leader. What do you do as a person so that you can be the right leader for the people, who rely on you? So that's something that I found very holistic, or a very holistic way of approaching this. Change takes time, right? Change does not happen over time. And especially deeper leverage points take a lot of time for things to shift, like mindset shifts and value system shifts take a lot of time. But that doesn't mean that you give up on it. You have to keep trying and pushing, and eventually there will be a tipping point. The 3 horizons framework is a graph which shows the dominant system declining, which in this case is a linear economy, the circular economy, which is the initial solution, which is the first attempt at fixing this problem, which kind of goes up and is then goes down. So it's that first attempt. So you in this first attempt, which in this perspective or for this context, let's think of as the circular economy. So it was one of the first ways of us trying to address a linear economy and find a solution. But that also has come to a decline now because we've realized that it's only focusing on resource efficiency just by itself is not enough. We have to look at an ecosystemic perspective. So I see regenerative economy or regenerative fashion as the third horizon, which is basically just starting, but eventually, hopefully, becomes the new norm. So that is also an interesting framework to look at because that's something that you can, use across different sectors. And this is something which is, from a macroeconomic perspective, been repeatedly tested and proven scientifically. So when you look at these kind of theories, which have existed for a long time, and then you start questioning what our reality is and where we are and where we want to go, and what paths have we taken that have failed, that have worked, but not in a way that we thought they would, and then what paths should we then, how should we deviate, and what is going to help us reach there? That's really the big question.
The larger section of the population, I think, is barely gripping with the idea of sustainability.
Correct.
Right? And then we have the circularity aspect on it, and then we have the regenerative aspect on it. And realistically speaking, also, human greed is not looking like it's declining anytime soon. So this seems like a really slow but organic process, because what you're really talking about here is a paradigm shift into values.
Yeah.
Into really redefining what growth means.
Yeah.
Really redefining what our metrics look like if we are looking at a growth report or a progress report. Something that is now being published by corporations as just a sustainability report or as an impact report is essentially going to be required to be the main growth report. Correct. And not like a subset of what we do. So sometimes it feels like it's a really long journey. Sometimes it might feel extremely utopic, sometimes altruistic, which if you actually go out and you speak to people outside of this circle, they don't know. So is tech a solution? Is tech and regenerative ecosystems, are there meeting at some point of a crossroads to accelerate this? Are there more academia? Are there more intersections between industry and education? What is happening on ground today to really accelerate this reality? Because right now it just feels theory.
Yeah, of course.
And while it feels like it's the right way. I mean, this is how it needs to be, because also we have 2030 years targets. We have 2050 years targets. There are the UN SDGs that keep spoken of everywhere right now. It's also becoming greenwashing at a lot of places. But there is net zero. There is, net positivity. There's just a lot of these jargon that is just being thrown at conferences or in your reports, etc. But this method is not really talking about carbon, or it's really holistic in nature. It's really how we need to exist. But is this the reality? Like, how far are we from this?
Yeah. Technology has always been a great tool to explore ways in which we can reduce the negative impact. But only relying on technology can never be the solution to reverse this negative impact, right? Because we have to remember, majority of the problems we see today stems from the Industrial Revolution, which is when there are 4 industrial revolutions. The first one is the mechanical, then the automated, then the digital, and then the internet or the AI revolution, right? So these are and all of it has been dominated by technology. So over reliance on anything, like we were talking earlier, like excess of anything is always going to turn out imbalance and bad, right? So yes, technology is a great tool to help address this, but over reliance on it is never going to help. So you have to understand how you use it. So when you think about technology and how it's applied in regeneration, let's say, the ancient tools of our ancestors were also technology, right? The wisdom of nature, in a way, is technology. So it's also harnessing that knowledge and then utilizing it in a way that works for our current problems. So regeneration is not just about going back in time or doing everything that our ancestors did. No, like you have to understand that you cannot not use technology anymore. You know, you cannot unlearn stuff that we have learned in terms of science and technology. But what you can do and what we need to do is understand the side effects and the negative side effects that technology or over reliance of it or the scientific method is creating, and how can we address it in a systemic and holistic perspective. And the simplest form and the way to do that is clean your gut so that your intuition becomes stronger, so that you know what is right and wrong.
So we are going to do a little rapid fire here to calm our nerves. And this is, of course, inspired by our love, Bollywood and Karan Johar. So
Okay, so we
because
love
it
you.
is rapid fire, you know that you need to keep it rapid and full of fire.
Sure.
That's the bare minimum requirement. Okay, you
Let's
can't take
do
too
it.
long. You have to be really rapid.
Okay.
Okay, come on. One Indian fashion tradition that the world needs to embrace more.
The versatility of drape, which is the Indian sari.
One misconception about regenerative fashion that drives you crazy.
That is just another buzzword.
If you had to create a Netflix series on fashion's future, what would it be called?
Stripping the earth naked.
Ooh, I love it. Okay. The sustainable fashion tech trend you think is overhyped.
Augmented reality or virtual try-ons.
Because
Because of the amount of processing power it requires.
you have actually answered this question before, but I'm still going to ask you one book or a film that most influenced your views on regeneration.
So, of course, Regenerative Leadership by Giles and Laura. Another book, special mention, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Beautiful poetic book about reciprocity in nature and with nature. And a film, I would say loads of them, True Cost, Slay, but also The Biggest Little Farm. It's all about regenerative agriculture, but it's a beautiful story about a family that relocate to a farm from an apartment in LA for their dog to make sure that dog has a better life.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
that
beautiful.
sounds like my future.
Yes.
Okay. What's harder, convincing brands to go regenerative or explaining circular economy to a 5-year-old?
Convincing brands to go regenerative. Because 5-year-olds are open and curious for knowledge.
Yeah. Not those
It's not
guys.
not the other way around.
One career move that scared you but paid off big time.
Taking a sabbatical at the height of my career in London.
One piece of advice you'd give a 20-year-old Ishwari and 20-year-old Darshana.
Walk your path. Don't overthink about whether you're conforming or not. You are enough as you are. Keep slaying.
I like that. I like that. That's a fun rapid fire. Thank you so much. Your hampers me.
Yay!
I told you this was going to be a roller coaster, but there will still be a lot of question marks for a lot of people because when they eventually go out to read about regeneration, there might be certain terms that they come across. So can we sort of try and simplify some of those, if not also have a small list, and maybe you can help define or explain some of those with a little clarity. So let's start with biomimicry.
So biomimicry simply is mimicking biology, so mimicking nature. So, for example, when you study an organism, let's take the African bush elephant, which has big ears. So, when you study this animal and you understand the anatomy or the way in which it uses its ears to keep its entire body cool, you can use that mechanism to design buildings or circular systems in order to keep entire buildings or rooms cooler with less, electricity or use of AC or that kind of stuff. So that's an example. Or when you study the correlation between two organisms, or it's called symbiotic relationships. Okay, so an example is the clownfish and a sea anemone. They have a very symbiotic relationship in nature. The sea anemone shelters the clownfish. So they make homes in there. And the clownfish is a very kind of brightly colored fish, right? So what it does is it acts as a prey for bigger fishes. And then the sea anemone eats that, right? So it's a very symbiotic relationship. And then in reciprocity, the sea anemone, which has some poisonous tentacles, does not eat the clownfish, or the clownfish's body is structured in a way that it is the poison from the sea anemone doesn't affect it negatively. So these are like examples in nature where either as an individual or in a symbiotic relationship, we can learn in terms of how can we use that in design or in our structures or in our cultures so that we can be more in alignment with nature. So that's biomimicry.
Interesting. What is permaculture?
Permaculture is basically the indigenous form of agriculture where you have a constant shift of crops. So you don't. It's basically the opposite of monoculture. Monoculture is where you always plant the same crop. So what we see as sugarcane and paddy fields and gehu ki khet or mustard ki khet in India through the Green Revolution. That's monoculture. So you're always planting the same crop and you're harvesting the same crop. But over time, with this constant planting and harvesting the same crop, it degrades soil quality. So over time, the soil becomes less and less, water receptive, which is why we get droughts. Which is why the entire, life cycle of a cloud and water and evaporation and rain doesn't happen. And that's what is causing a lot of global warming in a lot of parts of the world. So permaculture is an antithesis to that, or an anecdote to that, in the sense that you plant multiple different types of crops across the year, which not only support each other in terms of nutrients in the soil, but also help rejuvenate and regenerate the soil so that A, there's always some sort of food to eat for the farmer. B, it retains soil's water retention capacity. C, the organisms and that are in these different types of crops, the pests, what we call pests, actually end up becoming nutrients for other crops, right? So it's a very win-win-win situation for everyone, and that's what permaculture is, and that's definitely coming back in fashion a lot.
Interesting. What is biophilia?
Biophilia is basically bringing more nature into your spaces, right? So we are currently sitting in an office which has no plants, right? I mean, okay, there is one plant. So when you design a space which invites nature into it, right? So it can be in the way, like, for example, this is a window and we can see plants outside. But imagine if this was a much bigger window and if there was very limited barriers between nature and us, then that's biophilia. It's basically designing with a love for nature and integrating nature into spaces, into your lives, so that we have a reciprocal relationship, right? So because the reason we know there are lots of air purifying plants, which we have indoors. But imagine living in a forest. Like, of course, that is much better for our health than having 2 or 3 plants indoors. So I'm not saying that we need to move to a forest, but it's also designing spaces that can allow for better interaction between plants.
What is quantum biology?
So quantum biology is the study of biological processes using quantum mechanic theory. So what it does is it helps us understand the biological systems, how they work and interact with each other and their environment. It basically, simply speaking, studies how energy is converted into forms that can then later be used for chemical processes and transformations. And this is something which is, again, quite new and often feels very complicated for people to dive into. So there's a beautiful podcast called the Quantum Biology Podcast, which makes a lot of these topics and terminologies very easy to digest. And they often do a lot of conversations or interviews with people across different parts of professions. So for example, one of my favorite podcasts there is with an architect who talks about how light, or the right kind of light at the right time, impacts our biological functions. So she, I think, is a Pakistani British architect who talks about how, Jali, which is an ancient Indian subcontinent design feature, which is predominantly seen in a lot of like Mughal buildings and Rajasthani buildings, was such a great way to ensure that the right amount of rays came in, but then people could still not see who was looking at, right? Like it was used for mostly women, where queens and women state, in a way for them to look out and get the right kind of light in, but without risking, people outside looking in, right? That's just one example. But she was also talking about how over time, whether it's to accommodate for noise pollution or for heat and, various different reasons, we have changed the way our windows look and the glass panes that we use, right? Like older glass panes were not really that good with noise restriction. And they let in a lot, they didn't filter any rays. But over time, because of, like the UV rays and this and that and the other, like we've created so many filters that on one hand, they protect us from sun damage. But on the other hand, they also don't allow the essential rays that help us produce vitamin D in our body in. So that's also impacted our mental health over time. At the same time, like everywhere we see now, we have LED bulbs, right? Like that's energy and cost efficient, but it's also having a negative impact on our health because the more time we spend in artificial light, I don't know if you've noticed, but when you try to take a picture of video, especially in artificial LED light, it always has this flickering thing. That basically shows that it's not a straight stream of light. It's the reason you save money and it's cost effective and energy effective is because it constantly does this. But because our biological functions are based on a constant source of sunlight, they interpret this as a very fragmented source of light, right? So that also has a negative impact on our body functions, which is why we get a lot more headaches and a lot of eye issues and, depression and anxiety. So it's all interconnected.
Great. Thank you so much for defining them so crisply. So one understands and is also encouraged to go out and dig deeper. I think we've come towards the end of this amazing conversation, and I know that we can go on and on and on. But I'm not sure if my dear listener has enough capacity to keep looking at us for so long, since this is the first in-person video episode. But thank you so much. Is there anything else that you think which is like smaller nuggets of actions that somebody can look at in their day-to-day lives that'll make a smaller change for themselves? Often when we speak about sustainability or sustainable fashion as a thing, we often put the onus on the consumer to say that you change your behavior, and we discount that the corporations also have to put in the hard work. But accepting the fact that we are nature, so what can one do to really slow down a little, take time off, and rewire how we think about ourselves and the world around us?
I mean, I might say a few things that I can share, which are definitely not new. They're probably oversaid but probably not overdone. So one way I, slow down or connect or, try to do more often is spend time in nature. And that doesn't mean that I necessarily go to a national park or, into a forest, because where I live in Amsterdam, I don't have a forest or a national park close to me. But I have a lot of water. So, even challenge and rethink your idea of nature. Nature's everywhere. Of course, it's not in the concrete, but it is in the plants in your house. It's in your pets. It's, anything and everything. You are nature, right? So find natural ways of being that help calm you down. So there's a lot of study that shows the more time you spend in nature, or for example, the simplest thing is, which is very hard for most of us to do, is actually just watching the sunrise for 10 minutes. That is the most rejuvenating thing you can do on a microbiological level for yourself, because there's so much scientific evidence that just watching the sunrise for 10 minutes every day will completely change the way you feel, the way your cells work, all of that, right? And it's not something I have managed to do, but it's something that I'm hoping that I do more of in the coming years. But yeah, spending at least some time outdoors, whether it's in nature, whether it's just outdoors, wind is nature, being outdoors is, stepping out of your comfort zone, out of the four walls, interacting with each other. And then there's two words that I try to remember and then, use or do a lot in terms of action. One is reciprocity. And this is something I learned from braiding sweetgrass. And it's a word and term that is used extensively in regeneration. And reciprocity is about reflection and reciprocal action. And the last one is embodiment. Embodying is actually like when you hear about certain concepts, when you learn about new things, embodying is the act of actually putting it into practice. And that is the most difficult things for most people to do, including myself. Like, I know a lot, I have a lot of accumulated read knowledge, whether it's to do with yoga, whether it's to do with about all the things that we talked about. And it's an everyday constant struggle to ensure that I embody that. So, for example, the simplest thing that I try to embody is taking a pause before or after a meeting, not just going in, boom, 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 coming out. So, and I try to do that. I communicate that, like, let's start, let's gather together, let's land in place, let's just close our eyes and have a literal, like a minute long meditation so that we connect with each other and find our, ground zero and then take it from there.
That's very interesting, because through the entire gamut of sustainability, the other word that has been abused a lot is collaboration, right? And everybody is now looking at inter-industry, interdiscipline, whatever, like collaboration is key. And it is key, right? I mean, we are seeing a lot of collaboration between scientists and designers who are like material innovators and are leaning onto designers to actually have a real life case for it. But just to sort of think about how collaborations can be more meaningful without ego is, again, embracing interconnectedness in a sense, to say that we are all starting from the same plane. We are not coming into a meeting with an ego to say that I'm bigger or you're bigger. But here we are coming for that holistic output, which will be regenerative in nature. I'm so enlightened. I feel like Devi Ishwari, this has been I mean, I did not expect anything less from this conversation, to be honest. We are both drama queens. You may or may not have seen our true side in our public speaking, because we have to behave a lot of times. But yeah, I think that is also what helps us be connected with who we are.
And collaborate.
On
things like these.
Yeah, because it's interesting. But great, I think this is only the beginning, and I know that this episode has been very different from all the conversations that we've had in the past. It might come across as very philosophical, maybe too theory heavy, but I think it's also a very grounding experience to know where we stand and what we need to do as a population, because this is not a problem that will be solved by policy alone, regulation alone, corporations alone, governments alone. We just all really need to come together for it, and we need to go down to the bare minimum of who we are and connect with what's around us.
Bringing back the word of the day,
interconnectedness.
So it is an interconnected problem, so it has to have an interconnected solution.
That's amazing. My one question that I ask every guest is, what will you print on a t-shirt? But I'm answering that for you. It's going to be interconnectivity.
Yeah, interconnectedness, or we are one.
We are one.
I like that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This has been fabulous. I think it was
shake, stretch.
Yes, it was worth the time. And before we exit, I know that you might have a lot of questions for Ishwari. So where can people find you if they want to reach out to you, learn more? Please give us your email, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever.
So I think the easiest is LinkedIn, which is my professional space where I connect, which is Ishwari Thopte.
Thank you so much. This was another amazing episode of Ethically Yours. But do check out other episodes on our podcast. Our goal is to make sense of sustainability. So bite-sized information. We have around 15 or 16 episodes. Some are audio, some are video, but go take a look and let me know what else you want to learn about. Thank you so much and have a lovely day.